Hey team, welcome back to my channel. In this video, we're going to write a TKinter window application that calls another window, and we're going to be able to view, update, insert, and delete data from a JSON file. Before we dive into the source code for this application, I want to show you what you're getting. And this is roughly 280 lines of source code to make all this that you see happen. So we begin with our main form here, and it will show you a list of users. And you can add a new user. You can come in here and say Tommy Boy and a telephone number. And then you can hit the save button. And then notice Tommy Boy is not in the list, and I hit save and Tommy's there now. And that child window is gone. Now I can come and click on Tommy Boy and I can delete Tommy Boy, and Tommy Boy is gone. I can come back and put Tommy Boy back in there, save, and then we can edit a Tommy Boy. Ooh, that was a 2 on the end. Let's do a save. Notice the 2. I can come up here and modify this person, and his telephone number was all 2s at the end. Right? So that is the app. So it's got some windowing control. It's got a bunch of grid layout control to learn. It's got some JSON, some Tuple. There's a lot of things to learn here. So this is a great app for learning. All the source code will be in the first comment below. Let us begin at line 1. Notice I'm gonna, from TKinter, I'm gonna import star, and I'm gonna import TTK. Then I'm gonna import uuid and JSON. Now, you already know what these first two are, but this uuid allows me to create a unique identifier. And then, of course, JSON allows me to read and write JSON. So I have a global variable called myDataList, and then I have another global variable called current row. Those are very, very important. And as you see here, I'm going to initialize this list to be empty. Now, right off the bat on line 11, I'm going to say primary equals t little k close. And then I'm going to set the geometry to be 768 by 500. And then I'm going to give that primary window the title, manage users using child window. Now you'll notice on line 19, I say button new record. And then I say button and then primary. Primary is this current window. Then I'm going to put the text on there that says add new. And then I'm going to change the background color to kind of like a sky blue. Then I'm going to use a little bit of padding. And then on the command, I'm going to call make new record. Now, make new record is right here. And notice I create a blank tuple. And then I'm actually going to call a function that will open up another window, and I'm going to pass in the word add, that blank tuple, and primary, the parent. Now all of these together are very important because the grid, I'm using the grid layout in this app. I'm starting at row 0, column 0, and I'm going to make that sticky to the west, to the left, if you will. And then the command calls new record. Now this is not them. We wrote this app called open popup. And this is a data type of TK. And that gets us down to line 21. So far I have showed you this window. We have modified the title bar. We added this add new button. This is row 0, column 0, and we're about to talk about this next control. This is called a Treeview Control. And that Treeview Control, you'll see, has a header line and our columns. Let's understand that. On line 23, I say trv equals ttk dot treeview. There's our primary window. I'm going to say, hey, there's 5 columns, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Show headings, and the height will be 16. Then, because we're still using a grid layout, I say trv grid. I want this to begin on row 1, and I want it to begin in column 0. And then there will be a row span for 16 and a column span of 5. Now, it's very important to know about this row and column. Up here, notice that I started with row 0. I just can't come here and skip to line row 5. That's not the way the grid works. This will work successfully. So it starts off with 0, then we go 1, 2. Now we can add blank rows to give, like it appears to be, blank space in between it. But pretty much you have to start with 0 and then work your way down. So there we have defined our Treeview control. The Treeview control itself is just laid out pretty simple. There is this header, and then there's the detail. Now, the data that populated this Treeview control came from our JSON. You will notice when I did the header, notice that we started with action, ID, first name, last name, and cell phone. Notice I said anchor W for west. Notice this is bound to the left. Anchor center, I put it right in the center. Center for first name, center for last name, and center for cell phone. This one is a little bit bigger. There it is. And there we have the heading. Now for the TRV column, here is the column ID. And then I'm going to anchor everything to the west, to the left. And then notice I gave a custom width. You can see each of these, action, first name, last name, and cell phone are 140. Well, 100, and then 3 of the 140. Then notice this ID, 270. Now for the first name, last name, and cell phone, no stretching. But for ID and edit, I allow stretching. Our Treeview control is now complete. Now there is one thing that we need to really understand about this. We have to bind events to this Treeview control. Remember when I click on a line and then this secondary window pops up? Well, this right here, we had to program that click. And let me kind of show you where that code is, but we're not going to really get into it yet. I'm just going to show you where it is. So almost the last line of the program, trv bind, on a button release, I'm going to call the method mouse button up callback. So what that means is when I'm inside of this Treeview control and I click on a line and then my mouse button gets released, I'm actually going to load up that other window with this person third, the middle in there. And now we have talked everything that we need to talk about this Treeview control. Let us continue on line 39. On line 39, I have a function called load JSON from file. So on my local computer in a folder called TMP, I have a file called amigos.json. Let's take a look at that. As you can see, this is just a straight up JSON file. We have 4 fields, ID, first name, last name, and cell phone. The ID was that uuid generator, and then just some kind of dummy data for first name, last name, and cell phone. And this is a file that is on my local hard disk. On line 42, I say JSON.load using that file handler, and then that data goes into my data list. Remember, at the top of the program, I said my data list is empty. and I want to make it global because we're using it everywhere. And then what happens is I close that file handler, and then I print out file has been read and closed. Our next method on line 46 is another function. I say remove all data from TRV. That's our Treeview Control. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the for. Now for each item, get the child and then delete it. I'm going to stay inside of that loop and remove all the records that are there. On line 50, define a function called load TRV with JSON. Now, if you want to use a global variable in any other functions, you always have to say global, and that gives you access. So here's global, my data list, and then I'm going to call this function remove all data from TRV. Notice it's the method right above us. And then I'm going to set my row index to 1, and then look here. For each key in that my data list, I'm going to go get the data, and I'm going to assign it to individual variables. I'm then going to do a TRV insert, and notice that row index, and then I increment it by 1. So I'm going to stay inside of this loop and keep building that IID. Now notice my values, the very first of that, I'm saying edit. And then I give the GUID value, first name, last name, cell phone. Let's take a look at that. So now you understand where the word edit comes from. The GUID value, first name, last name, and cell phone, they come from individual files inside of that my data list. I just loop over that and I keep building this row index. That row index is very, very important for me because that is how I can do updates and deletes based on this row ID. That row ID matches this GUID. I can delete you or update you. And there we have the load TRV with JSON from line 50 to line 65. On line 67, mouse button up, callback event, notice global TRV. I'm going to get the line that you selected, and then I'm going to take that item and I'm going to turn it into a tuple. And then I'm going to open up that pop-up window. I'm going to send in edit and that tuple, and here is the name of our current form. Now, if you can remember where this mouse button up callback came from the very end of the program. Do you remember when we did the TRV bind on button release? Remember that mouse button up callback? Well, that is when we're on that and I click on a line and I release that mouse button. That gets called. So line 273 calls 67. And here is the most popular function in this app, open pop-up. Notice I'm going to send a mode, a tuple value, and my primary window. Now, my first field in here, child, that is the name of this next window that I'm going to pop up. So when this window pops up, I'm going to call this child. This is child to me. And the top level was that original window. So this right here is primary. That's our primary window. And this is child window. Those names are very, very important because you'll see that I turn them on and off and I pass around some configuration variables. And here you can see, I just updated this. Child title will say child window. Now this child.grabSet, this is a very important function. And what it does is when I click off this form, I don't want to be able to keep coming back to this form and changing my records. So as soon as this window right here appears, I can't click on this window anymore. See that? I can't click on it. I have to stay here. Now once I cancel here, then I can come back in here and load up a new window. And then the whole process starts over again. You know, I can't use that window. That is done by child.grabSet. So allow it to receive events and prevent user from interacting with the main window. There it is. So you can see that I'm going to say child.configure background to be light blue. And then I'm going to say load form equals true. Now I needed to set this value because of some state management. So you'll see line 84, load form becomes very important in just a moment. On line 85, notice I'm creating a label frame. Its parent is child. The text will say enter new record, background, light gray, and I'm going to use the font Consolis, a size of 14. What does that look like? Notice enter new record. So this frame here is kind of what we just built. So lines 85 to 89, that's where that happened. On line 91 through 98, notice that I'm starting to build my fields. You see I have ID, first name, last name, and cell phone number. And they're in some kind of nice box that's kind of got a ridge around it. Notice I say text ID, width is 25. Notice they're all 25. The height is 2. I'm going to anchor it to the west. Then my relief is that little ridge. So I kind of made the boxes look like they had a ridge around it. Then I'm going to use the font Consolis size 14. And that's going to be for each of these labels. Now, after I got done defining the labels are not on the grid yet. I had to do lines 95 through 98. I said, hey, for L1, that is going to be column 0, row 0, and I did some padding on X and Y. Y is 0 and X is 1. Now notice on L2 here, first name, it is now column 0, row 1. The third one, L3, column 0, row 2. And L4, column 0, row 3. We'll take one more look at that. 0, 1, 2, 3. We are now 1/3 of the way done. Let us continue. Notice I'm going to say ID value equals string var. This right here is an amazing feature. You need to study about string var. Then at the very top of our program, do you remember when I said import uuid? Well, that is going to create me a unique identifier, and I'm going to put that value into this ID value. And then notice I have a control called CRMID, and notice here I'm using text variable, and I'm going to put that ID, that string var, in there, and that's the only way that you can do that. So this setting its value and assigning it to text variable is very important. In fact, that's the only way it works. And then I'm going to assign that to row 0, column 1. Then I'm going to use some padding of 20 on the X. Then on the CRM first name, notice I'm switching the data type. Now we're going to be able to do some input. I'm going to be able to modify a first name and a last name. Notice my row for the ID is 0, for the first name 1, for the last name 2, and for the cell phone 3. All of them will be in column 1. The fields I just talked about were these down here. Notice this is a label, and I placed that GUID value in there. And then here we have some data entry text boxes, and first name, last name, and cell phone number. On the bottom line, row 4, you'll notice there's a save button, a delete button, and a cancel button. Let's see how we define those. Notice I said button add, button delete, and button cancel. Notice I'm using that input frame. My text is save, delete, and cancel. Have some padding around it. Then this is what's important about this. Command equals lambda colon, and then some function name. Notice here I say determine action. On the delete button, I say delete record. And on the cancel button, I said child cancel. So these are functions. In fact, just right here, you can see the delete record. Remember up quite a few rows, I said load form is true. Well, now we set it to false because now our form has been loaded. When the delete button is canceled, I'm going to get the ID, the first name, last name, and cell phone, and I'm going to put those into variables. And then I have this one method called process request, and I'm going to send in its type and then those values. Now, when I do this method, process request, I'm going to modify the contents of that JSON file. Let's go take a look at that. And here is process request. Notice that command type. I'm either going to do an update, an insert, or a delete, right? And each time, like when we just looked at the delete, what I'm going to do is I'm going to find that row by the GUID, and then I'm going to remove that from that list for that row number. Now, when I do an insert, I'm going to build a dictionary, and then I'm going to append that to my data list. And of course, when I do the update command, I have to go find it. I have to go update the ID to cell phone, and then I'm going to stick it back into where it was at that row ID. This is a very, very important function, process request 193 to 217. Now notice after I end up getting done populating my data list, I'm going to save that JSON to file. And then I'm going to clear all the fields that are on this form. But let's go back to where we were. So we were on delete record. You just saw me process request. You understand what delete does. I'm going to reload that main form because you just deleted a person. I don't want to show that to you again. Now remember on the top I had another grab function. Well, now I'm going to say grab release. And that's going to allow me to get focus on that primary window. I'm then going to destroy and update this child, kind of make them go away. And that is the delete record. Now, the child cancel, I'm just going to release the form and I'm going to destroy and update that child. Now with the function here, reload main form, notice I have another function called load TRV with JSON. Well, you can guess what that does. I'm going to open up that file. I'm going to remove everything from that list, and I'm just going to repopulate it. We'll look at that in detail. So just like I said, I'm going to first look at my global my data list. I'm going to remove all the data from that TRV. That's on line 46 there. And my data list has all the data. So I'm going to loop over there. I'm going to do an insert. I set row index to 1 and I increment it by 1 on 65 and I just stay in there for the number of records. You'll notice here on line 148, change background color. I pass in a new color and I just change the first name, last name, and cell phone to that new color. Notice on line 161, I actually call that, and here is just an RGB value that changes those colors. Now, when I say, save that record, add a new record, what I'm going to do is I'm going to get that ID value. I'm going to get the first name, last name, and cell phone, put those into values. I'm then going to check that first name to make sure, there's a first name. Now, if there's not a first name, I'm going to go and change the color and return. Now, the form is still there. The colors have just changed, so they're kind of reddish. Then, if and only if this test passes, I'm then going to try to do the insert, where I'm going to pass in the GUID value, first name, last name, and cell phone. I'm going to insert it into the data, and then do all those steps that we just did a moment ago with the delete. So you will notice that the save button, actually I say determine action. I don't have like a save and an update. I determine what this save is supposed to do. So on determine action, I want to make sure the form is not being loaded. And if that mode is edit, I'm going to do an update. Else, I'm going to do an add entry. I'm going to reload that main form, and then I'm going to release that form, destroy, and update. So we just finished with update record, update entry. Now you understand add entry, update entry, they all come from a decision based on what's passed in. You know about this change background color. You know, if you have missing data, I change color. And now you understand that method, process request, where I actually repopulate, delete, or update our list. Our next function is load edit fields with row data. So I'm going to pass in a tuple. If the length of that tuple is 0, I'm going to get out of here. Else, I'm going to set tuple 1 to the ID, tuple sub 2 as the first name, 3 to last name, and 4 to the cell phone. Now, if the mode is edit, I'm going to load the edit fields with the row data. We have been over the process request now several times. I think you got that. Remember, the source code is in the comments below. All of this is available to you. Now, find row in my data list. I'm going to pass in that GUID. I'm just going to, remember, whenever we're using a shared resource, you have to say global and the variable name. I'm going to start off with row 0, found as false. Now for rec in my data list, I'm going to, that input, I'm going to test, are they the same? If they're the same, I'm going to say found is true and then we'll break. A break will stop that 4. Then I'm going to do the test. Was found true? Yep. So I'm going to return the row. Now, if I was working through this list and I did not find it, found would be false. So I would be returning -1. Now we've already been over define action. This determines whether we're going to do an update or an add, an insert. Now save JSON to file. Just like we have a load JSON from file, we have a save JSON to file. So I'm going to open up that file in temp, amigos JSON. I'm going to open it up for write mode. Notice when I'm reading it, I open it up in R mode, read, as file handle. I'm an old C programmer. Normally we just said FH back in the old days. And JSON.dump, that list to file handle, and then I'm going to try to make it pretty with an ident of 4. I'm then going to close that file handle and then print out a little console message that the file has been written to and closed. On line 256, load JSON from file. I think we've been over this once, but it'll read that file, and my goal is to load up my data list. Now, clear all fields. Well, that's kind of simple. I take all of the fields that are on this form, on the child form, and then what I do is notice how I get the values out. I say from 0 to end, delete that. First name. CRM last name. From 0 to end, delete that. Cell phone. 0 to end, delete that. Now the CRM ID, that was actually a label. So I have to say configure text as an empty string. I'm going to set the focus to CRM first name. And this is how we get that unique ID. You say uuid.uuid4. This is a function call. It generates a unique ID, and I set it to that label. This is the value that I'm talking about right here. That builds a new one. This is supposed to be unique around the world. So UUID has been thought about pretty hard around the world. And then notice here, I'm going to change the background color to all white. And you remember this binding button release. This was on the TRV. And we're we're kind of like at the end of the program, so I'm going to say load JSON from file, and then load TRV with that JSON. And then here's my primary loop. I say primary main loop, and this is what keeps my program running. And guess what, team? We're done with the source code. If you have any questions, please leave a comment below and kind of like just ask me about this program and what you're having problems with. And if you would kindly give me a thumbs up, I'd appreciate that as well. You guys have a good week, and I'll see you back in my next video. Adios.